Breakfast at 7 o'clock. But let's have a quick word with our panel of experts this morning. We've got Brian Roberts from Cantor Retail, Rita Clifton, expert in brand and reputation, and our markets guest this morning is Holly Cook, editor of the investment website Morning Star, and of course the greatest brain in business, Mickey Clark, sitting alongside us.
Give me the fiver in a minute.
Brian Roberts, let's start with you. I mean, it's our biggest retailer in the country. How deep is the hole in which Tesco has found itself?
Well, yeah, I think there's clearly some massive issues going on with the business at the moment. We're expecting to hear that, although it's probably getting slightly less bad, the sort of trading situation in the UK, they are significantly underperforming all of their major competitors, as well as being outflanked by the discounters. Profitability under pressure anyway, but also under further pressure from this accounting black hole. And I think that's one of the big unknowns ahead of today's results is it 250 million? Is it a lot more? Is it a lot less? So, a lot of unknowns that we await to actually get some clarity on. But, clearly it's a business in with huge problems that we do need some sort of steering on how he might conceivably plan to turn things around.
And Rita, and branding and reputation is your bag. How big is the problem, do you think, facing Tesco? Because ultimately, supermarkets are all about trust, aren't they?
They are about trust. And what's interesting is Tesco started out as being the consumer champion. It was like a democratic brand that sort of turned into a slight totalitarian regime. I mean, they've obviously got to get the basics of retailing right, whatever, whenever, etc. But you've also got to get people to like you again. And that's been Tesco's big problem. When they were having reputation problems, people were lining up to give them a good kicking because they didn't engage emotionally with their customers. They weren't engaging very much with their employees. And of course, the whistleblowing about the accounting misstatements. The last thing you want is for your own people to start spotting stuff and taking it to the outside world because they don't think that they can get through inside. So they've got a lot of problems to repair. However, if they get back to where they started, which is the consumer champion, every little helping, then they might stand a chance of turning it round.
And Holly, a word from you. Tesco's share price has gone down by half or so over the past year. Can anyone invest in it now, or are there just too many questions?
Well, we would always look at investing from a long-term view, and I think Tesco is one of those shares that you really absolutely have to take a long-term view. There is undoubtedly risk involved in investing now. If you already hold shares, then you will have been feeling some pain as a result of the share price drop. But if you're looking on at least a 2-year view. I mean, actually, we're probably talking more like a 10-year view. This is the sort of share that you might stick in your child's junior ISA, and 10, 15 years' time, they'll be using it to help pay for their university fees. You really need to take a long-term view with retailers, and Tesco in particular. It does show some signs of having potential future volume growth, profitability also potentially coming back as sales come back, but this year and next year it's still looking weak.
Lots more from Brian, Holly and Rita over the course of the programme. And like I said, your thoughts, 85058, would be very well. Remember Project Verde? It's a rather good, catchy name. It was given to an ambitious idea, Co-op Bank's plan to buy more than 630 bank branches from Lloyds Banking Group. But the deal fell apart. Now we've got the official report into that, with blame pinned to the Co-op Bank, now of course controlled by American hedge funds, as well as the auditor KPMG and the Financial Services Authority, which was the regulator. Well, Andre Spicer is a professor of organisational behaviour at Cass Business School. Good morning, Andre.
Good morning.
Right, who do you think was most at fault? Is it the Co-op leadership?
Well, if we look at the report, the Co-op leadership comes out fairly badly. So essentially what you've got is a group on the board who have very little knowledge of financial services. There were 1 or 2 people on the board who did indeed have knowledge of it, but there were questions which were asked. I think the second big problem here was essentially that they had too many balls in the air. So they were trying to merge 2 organisations, which was Britannia and Co-op. They were trying to repurpose their IT platform. Then they started to try and buy another bank. So you've got all these balls in there. So it's almost like trying to juggle chainsaws when you can't even juggle some oranges.
And did this project ever stand a chance, or was it just sort of hopelessly naive, do you think, Andre?
It looks like it was hopelessly naive. I mean, there was a desire on the part of the regulators to establish more competition in the industry, which is understandable. But on the part of the management of the co-op, it wasn't so much the co-op bank, but it was the co-op group's management. They wanted to become a big player in the industry, and then they went for it. Now, what was interesting here is that the auditors seemed to say, you've got a clean bill of health. So it's like sending someone out who's got heart disease to run a marathon and say, yeah, you've got a clean bill of health, you can go for it.
But if you can't read a balance sheet, there's little prospect of hope for you, really, is there? I mean, why have they had to have a report into what they did wrong?
Well, I mean, I guess there are a number of players. So part of the reason they had this report was Lord Levine, I think, had been complaining that his bid hadn't been put up, and there was allegations put around that George Osborne was somehow behind it, and this very much puts that issue off the table. It then has looked into the kind of failings within the bank, so we saw that wasn't the case. You had the wrong people on board, but also we get our good friends KPMG appearing again and again. I mean, we have to remember they gave Bradford and Bingley a clear bill of health just before they fell apart. They gave HBOS a clean bill of health just before they fell apart. So there seems to be something going on here.
Are there any members of the co-op board still there?
I haven't looked.
Or has it been
that.
completely swept out?
There's been radical changes to the board, so you have got a lot more financial expertise, and obviously that reflects the fact that they're owned by an American hedge fund. We've also seen the fact that they've done a rebrand recently, so maybe they're on the way up. Who knows?
Well, worth saying, of course, Andre, that these days Co-op Bank is a very different entity and is largely controlled by American hedge funds. I mean, it's completely transformed.
Indeed. So it's about 70% controlled by outside interests and 30% controlled by the co-op group. So it's a very, very different kind of organisation. We've seen the organisation trying to sort of rebrand, but as we know from any kind of change process, you can change the board, but changing the organisation takes some time.
Yeah, like ethical and hedge fund balance.
Could this happen again, Andre?
Well, I guess if we look at all of the reports, what we see is there's been a range of issues which are raised. So there's a senior persons regime, which is trying to put individual responsibility down to directors, which is a good thing. It basically says if you get something wrong, you might go to jail. But we see some of the other banks, such as HSBC, yesterday complaining, oh, it's so difficult, and our poor senior board members who have this nice, cushy job 3 days a week. Well, not nice and cushy, but 2 or 3 days a week job for a couple of 100,000. I suppose, so there's that question. The second question, I guess, is has the other party which has been held to blame here, which is the auditors and indeed JP Morgan, who advised on the deal, have they been held to account here?
Auditors getting a tough time because we will find out later on. Tesco's results come out, and of course their auditors facing an inquiry as well, an internal inquiry into how they could have missed this £250 million.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of constant issue. And I guess the issue is that really auditors are often, their business model is the auditor's the foot in the door, and then they use that to sell other services to the bank, which is advisory, consultancy, et cetera, So there's big questions around whether that's a viable business model, or whether some countries, for instance, have 2 auditors. Other countries would say we need to switch auditors more frequently. So there's big questions to be raised there.
Rita Clifton sitting next to you, expert in brand and reputation. I mean, if ever a brand has taken a shellacking when it comes to reputation, it was Co-op, wasn't it, on this deal?
Oh, I know. And actually, the real tragedy is that Co-op were actually doing pretty well. I mean, particularly in terms of consumer goodwill, had a really distinctive proposition in the market, the whole sense of it being a democratic organisation that was really there for its members and its customers. There's a very, very powerful thought there. And of course, authenticity is a really, really important characteristic of brands. And unfortunately, when you've got the Co-op Bank, which is not owned by the people that maybe its customers thought it should be owned by in the first place, and didn't have the same authentic proposition, this isn't going to work. I'm sure they can do a great job, or rather a better job, shall we say, and it would be difficult to think of doing a worse job than happened. However, what's the proposition now? If it's not ethical, what is it? Because there are a lot of other companies in the financial sector who are customer champions and not doing a bad job, like Nationwide, for example.
More to come from Rita when we chat Tesco, but experts and Brian Roberts, Director of Retail at Cantor Retail. Rita Clifton, expert in brand and reputation. And you've already heard from Holly Cook, editor of the investment website Morning Star. Brian, let's start with you. You spend a lot of your time going around supermarkets, analysing performance. Where's it gone wrong for Tesco?
I think for me it's all about clarity. So I think as we heard from a number of shoppers there, it's there's lots and lots of hoops you have to jump through as a shopper. It's multi-buys, it's loyalty card, you have to drive a car and buy the petrol, blah 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 blah. But all you have to do with Aldi is just turn up and you get value for money. So I think they need to really bring back some clarity to the proposition in terms of the smaller range, perhaps fewer, more impactful offers. And really establish what they stand for. I think as Rita pointed out earlier, they used to have the shopper at the very centre of their business, and unfortunately for the business, they've replaced the shopper with the shareholder, and that's driven some very, very bad behaviour. Not only in terms of what we've been hearing about, in terms of how they might flamboyantly treat money they receive from investors, but also in terms of in-store behaviour. So cost cutting, housekeeping, cleanliness, execution has all suffered as they've tried to protect the bottom line by cutting staff costs. So put the shopper back in the middle, and I think we might start seeing some improved results.
This £250 million profit overstatement, we should say this is not, it's not fraud. It's about moving figures from one period to another. It was money that was always going to be there, wasn't it? But it's about the presentation. Yeah,
very much so. I've been speaking to suppliers over the last 2 weeks, and they've been telling me they would organise a promotion for April. Tesco would demand the money early or just take the money early, and that promotion wouldn't happen until August. So it's essentially it's Tesco borrowing off itself, and it becomes a bit of a vicious circle in terms of that behaviour has to be replicated in order to protect the next set of numbers. So it's not good form at all. And what worries me is that this cannot have been limited purely to this isolated 6-month period. This must have been going on for quite some time.
Well, we will probably discover that later on. And Rita, when you listen to things like that, it's about moving money around. One imagines that the reputational impact of doing that will far outweigh £250 million. I mean, we've already seen the market cap. The value of the company has been hit by a huge multiple of that.
Oh, definitely. But, good brand management, i.e. managing your brand in a way that makes sure that what you do is trusted and liked across the whole customer experience. You've just got to make sure that good brand management is good risk management. And it seems to me that this kind of behaviour is not good risk management, because at the end of the day, if you lose your reputation, you lose your value. Tesco's lost half its market value, I think, as you said earlier. I mean, Tesco used to lead the market, and the words
stack it high, sell it
and
cheap.
off. Well, stack it high, sell it, but also particularly to look after customers. I mean, Tesco has more information about customers than any other company. The problem is when you treat people like numbers, as opposed to really understand your role in their lives, how you can make their lives better, how you can make every little help. If you don't live that and deliver it every day, and particularly in retail, this is a vicious, very fast-moving market. They're being bashed on the head by Waitrose at the top end. They're being bitten in the bottom by Aldi and Lidl, and they're being shunted from the side by Sainsbury's and Asda. This is a very difficult, squeezy middle space.
Tesco started out as the consumer champion, as you pointed out earlier, but the trouble is the emphasis became very much on margin, what it bought the produce from its producers and what it sold it to its customers. And it's now found out that it's not trusted on either end.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got to have both ends burning, and all those cliches about in the middle of the road you get run over, that's true. They've got to get back to the high ground, and the high ground in any market, and particularly this one, is about being on the side of the consumer, understanding the consumer, how it is that you can help them. Because at the moment, they're being helped on low prices by the discounters, they're being helped on quality at the other end by Waitrose. There's lots and lots of choice in this market. They used to be simply better at everything they did. The hygiene, the basic factors are retail and everything else. And they also used to be very good at innovation. I mean, the club card was a great innovation. Tesco Finest was a great innovation. They've got to get back to doing exactly that. And then they can think about expanding, extending and everything else, because they've added bits on. But frankly, if your core brand isn't liked, you can buy all the coffee shops that you like, but it'll pollute that new business and it won't sort out what's happening right back at home.
Holly, at 7 o'clock these results come out. You, me and everyone else will be looking at them. What's the first bit? What's the first figure you're going to look at to give you insight?
I think the like-for-like sales is normally the first number that analysts will look at, and we're expecting that that's going to have declined again. Obviously, looking for more detail on the UK accounting problems, the profit margin in the UK is likely to be weaker because of the sales growth. Really trying to look for any positives in there, because news has been so negative recently. I think we're going to probably see that online business is doing pretty well, whereas the hypermarkets or mega stores are likely to be more of a weak spot. But I think I think there's very little doubt that sales growth is going to have been negative.
What do you think of the Waitrose? I think it was the Waitrose boss yesterday who said that these mega out of town stores are now 20 years out of date.
I think there's a lot of agreement around that, and I think, so looking at Tesco's in particular, I think a lot of customers find it a bit overwhelming. The way that they're laid out isn't particularly helpful. You're sort of bombarded with information. You can't find the things that you want. As we've heard from other listeners, the quality of produce is not so great, and I think we're seeing that in Tesco's results, that it's the smaller stores that you're seeing on the high street that are doing better, and it's online shopping that's also doing better.
David has texted in. He says that he thinks Tesco are now a takeover target. You'd have to have pretty deep pockets, but there are companies around the world who've got a lot of money to spend. Holly, could that happen?
Anything's possible. I think we'll hear a lot more at 7 o'clock when we get the detail of the results. But I think longer term, it's going to take some time before we can see whether Tesco can rebuild its reputation, whether it can rebuild value for shareholders, and ultimately whether it can actually rebuild the business proposition for the customer.
Brian Roberts. One thing that I have heard consistently over the past few weeks, doubts growing about the chairman of Tesco, Sir Richard Broadbent, the way he's handled this situation. How difficult is his position?
Yeah, I think we heard yesterday they might be sort of putting the feelers out to look for a new chairman. I think he's not exactly covered himself in glory recently in terms of his awareness of what's going on within the business. There's obviously the entire accounting black hole. There's not necessarily been a great deal of supervision about the presence or otherwise of key personnel within the UK business. So the FD has been AWOL. They're now likely to be without 8 further senior executives who we hear yesterday might actually be permanently excluded from the business on the back of that accounting scandal. So there's not been any sort of vigilance, not any great deal of accountability, if you like, for the chairman's role in terms of, when the CEO is on gardening leave, the chairman should step up and perhaps be running the show, and that really hasn't happened.
Do you think this crisis was a slow burner? Well, it's not happened overnight, has it?
Yeah, I mean, I fail to see how it can be limited to a 6-month period when we're talking about supplier relationships, and I've heard from suppliers over the last couple of weeks this has been going on for quite some time. So I'd be remarkably surprised if it's purely limited to a 6-month period and if it's purely limited to 250 million.
We've just had a text in here. Says I'm rather tired of people saying how wonderful Aldi and Lidl are. Rita, do we overplay that? Do you think are we giving them too much credence?
Well, their market share would say that we're not exaggerating their performance at all. I mean, they have come in and changed the rules. Aldi and Lidl have changed the rules of this market. One of the things they really have done, and that actually a brand like Tesco should have been right on top of, was changing consumer buying habits, changing expectations. And what Aldi and Lidl do, they've come in with a really simple, clear and highly convenient proposition. as opposed to great big out-of-town supermarkets that maybe just didn't meet people's changing needs and habits.
They offer value for money.
They offer value for money, but actually they're doing even more than that. They're called the discounters as opposed to the supermarkets. That's a really interesting clue in its own right. But now they're building real quality on top of that discounting. So they've got a double whammy, a powerful double whammy, and they're now using it to fantastic effect. And of course, polarisation in this market. They are owning increasingly the bottom end, but canny shoppers, and at the top end you've got Waitrose, where it's highly aspirational and they're playing a very different game. But it's in the middle, the squeeze middle, that wonderful term, that the brands are really struggling. I mean, the issues going wrong with Sainsbury's as well. So the discounters have changed the rules. All the other competitors, the traditional competitors, have really got to get back on their game. And that means getting to their customers, and particularly, though, and with Tesco, their own people. Their own people have got to feel proud and confident about what it is that they're doing and what it is that they're delivering. And that, I would suggest, is also a very good place to start.
Thank you all for your opinions that you've heard from Rita Clifton, from Brian Roberts and from Holly Cook. We're going to be covering this all through 5 Live Breakfast. The results are out at 7, and then response from Douglas McNeill, from Adrian Bailey, and from Christopher Haskins, Lord Haskins, through 5 Live Breakfast. Don't miss a minute of it.